Now, this is some of these things, and here's what I want you to think about. As we're going through some of these, it doesn't matter to me whether you take what we're talking about today and you apply it towards your personal life or towards your professional life first. Because wherever you apply it first, guess what? You're going to come back and you're going to apply it to the other domains in your life a little bit later. The first strategy is be open to new perspectives and paradigms. And this is going to talk very specifically about one of the peculiarities about our brains, which are very powerful, but they have a few bugs in them. If I wanted to get better at anything, including treating people with respect, possibly being a better parent, being a better coach, whatever I wanted to do, there's a couple very simple steps I'd have to go through. The first is this. I have to have a new awareness. I have to have new information that I haven't thought of before enter into my system and help educate me, right? But we can't stop there. After we have new insights, by the way, we'll refer to those as those aha moments. How many of you have ever had aha moments? Where do they strike you? Anybody ever drive to work, to school, and make the entire commute, get into your parking space and not remember anything about the drive? Because you were processing things? How many of you have done that before? How many of you have ever had to wake up in the middle of the night to write something down because it came to you while you were sleeping and you didn't want to forget it when the morning came? Yeah. So we have those aha moments, and it doesn't really matter where they hit you, but they're those brilliant bursts of insight that allow you to reframe current problems or challenges or maybe opportunities even. But you can't stop with the new awareness. You have to then integrate it or learn and assimilate. And what that means is you have to be able to then say, how do I turn this insight into something that I will start to do differently to achieve different outcomes? If we can't turn great idea into action or behavior, at least in our brains, then we kind of interrupt the process. And then finally, what do you think the final step is? What does Nike's say? Just do it, right? It's to take action. Now, here's the $25,000 pyramid question. Of these three stages, which do you think is the most difficult for the vast majority of people? A little bit louder, please. How many of you think it's taking action? Okay? And it would make perfect sense. Because how many of you know more about good health and nutrition than your commitment to eating healthy and exercising on a regular basis would indicate? Please raise your hands. How many of you know more about good organizational skills than your home office or your basement would indicate? Please raise your hands. How many of you know more about good communication skills than your spouse would tell us? Please raise your hands, right? So to a degree, we're all educated derelicts because we don't use what we know already. But in fact, the most important, or probably the most critical, and the one that gets overlooked, the most important part of this is actually having the new awareness to begin with. Why do you think having a new awareness about things and people is so difficult for us? Because why? Because it means change, and change in particular in how we process information. You see, the human brain truly is the world's most amazing, most complex computer. But you have to understand how it was built. And I don't mean by whom, I mean what the actual construction is. You see, whenever you engage the world, what you bring into it every day, when you wake up, think of literally your eyes open up and it's like the lights on your computer blinking into activity. And one of the things that you wake up with is a very set and rigid and accurate, according to you, picture of the way the world is, according to me. The way the people in my world are, according to me, right? Now, that way the world is includes all of my conscious perceptions and conclusions, my learned attitudes and core values from my parents, mentors, past people, my self-esteem and my self-image, my personal history and experiences, stereotypes and prejudgments that I've become very, very comfortable with, and even, in fact, my genetics. All of those things play a role in how I see the world. So it's very difficult to change that. So one of the things we want to do is ask ourselves, what in fact is my truth? When I get hung up on negative images, negative notions of people, what are those truths that I'm locking onto? One of the truly most fascinating books, and I don't recommend many books, but this certainly is one of them. It's by a gentleman named Robert Burton, MD, On Being Certain, Believing You're Right Even When You're Not. How many of you work with that person? How many of you are that person? Being right, it turns out, is really, really difficult to get away from. And here's, after all of his research, here's what Dr. Burton tells us. He says, being right or feeling certain about something is nothing more than an emotion. That's it. It's just an emotion. Like anger, love, hate, any other primal emotion that we feel. And here's the real clincher. According to the research, there is absolutely zero correlation between how strongly you feel that you're right about something and the likelihood that you really are. Zero. None. In fact, the more certain we are about things, what does it actually create for us? Blind spots. Because rather than taking new data, in which many cases factually challenges what we think we're certain about or right about, what we end up doing is inventing reasons why it doesn't apply to us or this situation. It's one of the traps of the human brain. So I'm going to suggest that we learn, we practice. By the way, this will go over very big with your spouse. Being wrong. But going about being wrong. How many of you think that your relationships with your spouse would be much easier if one or both of you would simply say more often, "You're right, I'm wrong, dear"? No, not. How many of you just are not willing to go there at this point in time? So how can we be right, but be right, or be wrong, but be wrong the right way? Number one, just because I don't understand or agree with something doesn't make it wrong. It may just mean that I don't have currently the reference points to understand it the way you or somebody else does. Number two, even if I believe or believe in something very strongly, it doesn't make me right. What does it make me? Maybe minimally very strong in my convictions. Maybe on bad days, pig-headed, obstinate, stubborn, and a boat anchor on the rest of my team's productivity just because I don't want to see something. I think I'm right. Here's what I think is the hallmark of wisdom. And we can take in information that does not agree with what we think, and we will willingly hold it up to the bright light and give it a fair day in court. And if the information makes sense, we actually change our mind. We update our computer and say, you know what? I hadn't thought of it that way. That makes sense. I think that's the hallmark not only of maturity, but of wisdom, and hopefully something we can pass on to our children. At the end of the day, there's a great quote. There's a fellow by the name of Eric Hofer out of the Pacific Northwest, and he said, "Learners inherit the earth, while the learned are beautifully equipped to deal with the world that no longer exists."